And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, should I share my hobby of vampire live-action role-playing with human resources? And with the Rolling Stones back on tour, will fans find out exactly what aging gracefully looks like, and also daily blood transfusions? And now, the podcast host with a dog companion who can't wait to be part of another security cam viral video, Pete Dominic.
That's right, Pete Co. Thank you very much for another amazing introduction. Can't do it without you, buddy. I mean, I can. It's just less fun. Hello, my friends, and welcome to Stand Up. Very happy to have you joining me today and every day, because I do the podcast every weekday, and so I'm psyched whenever you're here. Sorry for some of the technical issues yesterday. I've been having a pretty good run, but my equipment is on loan. It's out. It's to be fixed, so I'm using workarounds, but I think it's all right. I think it's going okay. Just forgot to do a couple things yesterday. My apologies. Sincerest apologies. Thanks for you. Those of you who reached out and said, hey, man, this isn't working or that isn't working. I go in, I fix it, and make it better for other folks. So keep the feedback coming. Standupwithpete@gmail.com is my email. Ping me anytime, day or night. It's always open. I have two PhDs joining me today. Another great conversation with Ruth Ben Ghiat and Dr. Jason Johnson, both joining me, and I think you're going to like them a lot. Yesterday was a great day because my daughter Julia turned 14, and we had a nice little celebration, like one of those weekday birthday celebrations. Nice dinner. She opened a couple gifts. We had a good time, and then it was over very quickly as she abandoned us to her bedroom. But she's great. We're great, and I'm hanging in there. My ankle's a lot better in just 2 days. I can't even believe it, so I'm pretty happy about that. It might be all right to really move around on it by the end of the week. But thank you for all of your support and Ace Bandage tips. Lots to talk with you about on the news today, and then I'll get to my guests. So let's do it right now. Let's hit the last 24. All right, let me start in Brooklyn, where yesterday the R&B singer R. Kelly, who for more than 25 years faced accusations of sexually abusing dozens of young victims without consequence, was finally found guilty of federal crimes on Monday. For over a month, he's been on trial at a federal court in Brooklyn on one count of racketeering and 8 counts of violating a federal law called the Mann Act, addressing sex trafficking. That's named after it's a person named Mann, M-A-N-N, not Mann Act, gender-wise. Anyway, it's a federal law addressing sex trafficking. Federal prosecutors accused Kelly of running a, quote, enterprise through which he exploited his star power and time again to prey on underage girls, young women, and at least 2 male victims. Here's the ferocious federal prosecutor outside the courthouse after the verdict came down. This is Jackie Kasoulis, and this is what she had to say.
In rendering its verdict today, the jury delivered a powerful message to men like R. Kelly. No matter how long it takes, the long arm of the law will catch up with you.
Okay, and here is women's rights attorney who represented several accusers in the case against the now convicted R. Kelly, Gloria Allred.
I have pursued many sexual predators who have committed crimes against women and children. Of all the predators that I have pursued, however, Mr. Kelly is the worst for many reasons. First, he used the power of his celebrity to recruit vulnerable underage girls for the purpose of sexually abusing them. These were not May-October relationships, which is what his defense attorney wanted the jury to believe. These were crimes against children and some adults. Second, he used the power of his business enterprise and many of his inner circle employees to assist him and enable him in his plan and his scheme to lure his victims to him, isolate them, intimidate them, control them, indoctrinate them, punish them, shame them, and humiliate them.
All right. Well, that was a pretty tough thing to hear and a way to start today's episode and your day if you're listening in the morning. So I guess you're probably having a better day than R. Kelly and his victims, although hopefully they find some closure in the justice that they've gotten now. Pretty horrible story. I wish I hadn't started the show that way. Well, here's something a little bit more positive. President Biden received his COVID-19 booster shot Monday, days after federal regulators recommended a third dose of the Pfizer vaccine for Americans aged 65 and older.
We are helping. We're doing more than every other nation in the world combined. We're going to have well over 1,100,000,000 shots, and we're going to continue going. We're going to do our part. We've also given a great deal of funding to COVAX, which is the vehicle that does this. So we have plenty of opportunity to make sure we get everyone in the world to play our part, the largest part in the world of getting everyone vaccinated.
Oh, and Mitch McConnell, the Senate Minority Leader, announced he got a COVID-19 booster shot as well. He's doing his part the same day as Joe Biden did. These very old leaders got their boosters, which have been approved for seniors, healthcare workers, and other vulnerable individuals. If you're eligible, go get yours. Here's the turtle.
Republican leader.
I'm glad to share that a few minutes ago I received a booster vaccination for COVID-19. All throughout the pandemic, I've followed the best advice from experts and especially from my own healthcare providers. It was an easy decision to receive a booster. I'm a survivor of childhood polio from before vaccines. Before vaccines eradicated that disease here in our country and around the world now. So I've been a lifelong champion of vaccinations. Mountains of evidence tell us these shots are safe, effective, and dramatically shrink the odds of severe disease or death from COVID.
All right. Well, it does piss me off that he got his booster shot before anybody else, but what do you expect? Okay, so I've been saying for a long time when the issues of immigration comes up, when there's these runs at the border, these caravans, these refugees, these folks that are escaping harsh circumstances in their own lives, in their own countries and communities, trying to come to America, I've said, well, if you want to fix that, you've got to have a better framework for folks to come into the country, for them to be vetted, for them to be assimilated into our systems and enrolled and everything so that they can eventually vote for Democrats. I mean, at least that's what Tucker Carlson and right-wingers will have you think, that Democrats are letting them all in so that they're going to be voters for Democrats. It makes zero sense. A, there's not enough of them to make a difference in the outcome of any election. And B, they're not automatically enrolled as voters. It's preposterous, but it is a great argument and talking point for right-wing, xenophobic, great replacement white supremacists to keep on making. But I've been saying that you need immigration reform. You need a framework in place like they had when President Obama had passed it out of the Senate, but John Boehner of the House Republicans, who had the majority then, just didn't take it up for a vote. Anyway, here is Jen Psaki, Joe Biden's spokeswoman, dropping a Psaki bomb saying basically this.
We would argue that for all of those Republicans who are standing at the border and giving speeches about how broken the system is, why don't you join us and be a part of the solution instead of relying on speeches? Because we can work together and get immigration reform passed and make the system work.
Of course, Republicans don't want that. They don't want these people coming in at all. These Republicans are not the Republicans of even 2013. They don't want anybody new coming in. So they're not going to pass any kind of legislation that could be considered immigration reform. We're just so far from electing people that can get that done on the right. Okay, so unfortunately, speaking of Republicans who are holding things up, what about that pesky debt limit? Now, I don't think we go to the point of default because I think the Democrats would have to get rid of the filibuster before we would actually default on our debt. But Chuck Schumer should not let that stop him from warning the American public that if Republicans continue to play with this debt limit, and these politics around it, then that's what could happen. Here is Chuck Schumer in a boring-sounding, monotone voice delivering important information, disconcerting information about what could happen.
After today, there will be no doubt about which party in this chamber is working to solve the problems that face our country and which party is accelerating us towards unnecessary, avoidable disaster. At the end of last week, I filed cloture on proceeding to the continuing resolution sent to us by the House of Representatives, which, among other things, would prevent a government shutdown and suspend the debt limit so we can pay for our debts incurred during the previous administration. In a few hours, we will vote on cloture on the motion to proceed to this bill. The Democrats will do the responsible thing, the right thing, the thing that's been done for decades by both parties, and vote yes. Now, if Republicans follow through with their plans to vote no, they will be on record deliberately sabotaging our country's ability to pay the bills and likely causing the first ever default in American history. The consequences of a default would be, in the words of Secretary Yellen, catastrophic. The best case scenario is the best case under this awful situation is that our country would fall into another recession, potentially erasing all the progress we have made to pull ourselves out of the COVID crisis. That is, if we're lucky. Otherwise, one analysis warned that default could hurt Americans for generations.
Yeah, well, I'll be following that story closely, so you don't have to. I'll let you know what you need to be concerned about when it comes to debt ceiling and default, but you let me know also, because what if I forget to let you know, or if I mess it up? You should tell me what you think. All right, well, over the weekend, former president, the last guy, the orange guy, remember, I think people forget that he painted himself orange. I always thought that would be the thing, by the way. I've said this many times, but I always thought, well, people aren't going to vote for a guy who's orange, who sprays himself orange. But they did twice, even more the second time. Anyway, he's still out there somehow living, and he continued to push the big lie about the election he lost during a rally in Georgia. So over on CNN, Jay Tapper played a clip from the rally, again, of Trump. He made it clear that Trump is clearly lying. I'm not going to play that clip for you, but I will play CNN contributor Amanda Carpenter, who's a Republican, and she went on a tear against Republicans backing 2020 election conspiracies, and I thought it was pretty good. So here it is from CNN's Amanda Carpenter.
I mean, once again, we just have to underline the president's lying, former president's lying. There was no evidence of widespread fraud that would have changed the election result. And the only person who sought to disenfranchise legal voters was Trump and his team. And yet it seems like it doesn't matter. The Republican base now believes this.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't an exercise in facts and logic. What Donald Trump is doing, this is a continuing act of election subversion. It's happening in Arizona. I don't even like calling what's going on audits. These are partisan sham investigations meant to delegitimize the election and prime the base to overturn the results of of a credible election. This is ongoing. You're right. We could fact check this all day, but this is an exercise in power in the way that he gets other Republicans to do what he wants to do. And that's why these sham investigations are spreading to places like Texas, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, because this isn't about votes. It's not about counting them. It's raw power and setting the stage to cancel elections that Republicans don't win.
Yeah. All right. Now, that is some perfectly executed political analysis, including the right framing of what they're calling audits, but should not be called audits. They're a complete sham. And I loved what Amanda Carpenter had to say there. I also thought this, I got to play the Tubinator again for you. Jeffrey Toobin with some great analysis. Did I play this yesterday? I don't think I played this yesterday, but I'm starting to feel that I played this yesterday, but I couldn't have because I think it's from yesterday morning, the last 24. It's supposed to be at least. Anyway, here he is. I'll play it again. Jeffrey Toobin talking about an important article written by Fred Kagan in the Washington Post. If you haven't read it, pretty fascinating. I saw Eric Siegel had tweeted it. And this is a scary analysis, but I think important. And That's why I'm sharing it with you here on the show. Here's Jeffrey Toobin. But of course, got to say it, no sign that he was at all masturbating during this analysis.
This is a widely read article by Robert Kagan in the Washington Post a couple of days ago about how we are already in a constitutional crisis because basically we now have a very substantial portion of the population who will not acknowledge that the other side can win an election legitimately. Trump said it at the rally that even in 2022, 2024, we are not going to believe that a Democrat can legitimately win an election. So now we have these audits going on around, these purported audits going on. The one in Arizona just happened. We've got one in Texas. There may be one in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. And the idea that your opponents are illegitimate and incapable of winning an election is something new in American politics, and it's scary and it's dangerous. I don't like to think of myself as a big alarmist, but I think we're in a dangerous place now.
Yeah, well, I think I don't like to think of myself as a big alarmist either. But if Toobin's ringing the alarms, then I'm ringing them as well. Yeah, we're in a dangerous place. Get hyper-local. Work on local issues, make sure they don't take over the board of elections with folks who believe that Democrats eat babies and are lizard people, because that's where we're headed. So get local, do whatever you can. Give money, run candidates, run yourself. All right, and now let's talk about the President Biden's multi-trillion-dollar domestic agenda, which, of course, is in peril because of two Republicans that are pretending to be Democrats. I'm talking about Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. Well, yesterday, Biden's agenda, this big bill, got a prominent boost from former President Barack Obama, who went over to ABC News and sat down with Robin Roberts for an exclusive interview about why the country desperately needs these programs and that he supports taxing the wealthy, including himself, to help support the package. This is a couple minutes long, but it makes you feel better than the rest of the clips just hearing the guy's voice, if you ask me.
You know President Biden extremely well, and this is a really important moment for his administration, needing to pass comprehensive legislation. And even within the Democratic Party, there seems to be some divide. How do you think he is handling this particular moment, and what does he need to do to pass his agenda?
Well, first of all, I think the Build Back America program, the package that you described, is something that America desperately needs. You're talking about us stepping up and spending money on providing child care tax credits, making those permanent to help families who for a long time have needed help when it comes to things like child care. You're looking at making our infrastructure function more efficiently and effective. You're talking about rebuilding a lot of buildings, roads, bridges, ports, so that they are fortified against climate change, and also that we start investing in the kinds of energy efficiency that's going to be required to battle climate change. So when you look at the overall package, it's got a headline price tag of $3.5 trillion, but that's not a single year. This is spread out over a number of years, and most importantly, it's paid for by asking wealthiest of Americans who have benefited incredibly over the last several decades, and even in the midst of a pandemic, saw their wealth and assets rise enormously. Asking them to pay a few percentage points more in taxes in order to make sure that we have an economy that's fair for everybody.
But should they be concerned that that's how they're going to have to pay for it, in essence?
I think that they can afford it. We can afford it. I put myself in this category now. And I think anybody who pretends that it's a hardship for billionaires to pay a little bit more in taxes so a single mom gets child care support, or so that we can make sure that our communities aren't inundated by wildfires and floods, and that we're doing something about climate change for the next generation. That's an argument that is unsustainable.
All right, it's always great to hear the adult in the room. In this case, it's President Obama. I didn't understand her question, Robin Roberts. Should they be concerned? The ultra wealthy, that they have to pay more taxes? They don't even, that's the thing. They don't even realize they're missing that money. It's nothing for them. It makes no difference at all in their lives. They don't even miss it. It's infuriating. Okay, well, that's all of the news. Those are a lot of depressing clips. Hopefully you're okay. Are you okay? Sorry if that was too much of a downer, but I did like an ending with President Obama. It's always an optimistic-sounding voice. All right, well, that's all the clips I got for you, but I got a lot more headlines in the news dump. Rapid fire style. Take it away, Pete Co. Another patented news dump jingle.
Aussie man is gored by goat, vicious angry grump. This goat don't give a shit on today's news dump.
I like that sound effect. But now I don't even know. Was that a real thing, Pete? He's got me looking it up. I just Googled Australia gored goat, and I don't think that one happened. Some of the news dump jingles are inspired by actual real life stories, but here it is: grizzly bear gored to death by mountain goat. This is a grizzly bear and not an Aussie. It's confusing. What's going on here? I don't know if that's a story. But here are some that are. And just to stick with the theme, this one is about goats. In Atlanta, a herd of goats has eaten their way through the streets of Atlanta. Atlanta police said the herd was brought in to eat weeds at a Kroger supermarket, but somehow the goats, they somehow ended up escaping, which I think is an amazing story. Herd of goats eats their way through the streets of Atlanta. Love it. Well, I played that clip earlier. Chuck Schumer, I probably should have mentioned Chuck Schumer's threatening what would happen if Republicans wouldn't lift the debt limit. Well, Senate Republicans did block the debt limit. We expected them to. The stopgap funding as the government shutdown looms, as Congress now just has days to cobble together government funding bill. Senate voted 48 to 50, with Democrats falling short of 60 votes to stop the Republican filibuster. So I'm just saying that I don't think they're going to have to, throughout the filibuster, get around the filibuster before they would default on our debt. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen put it in stark terms in a recent Wallstreet Journal op-ed, saying, in a matter of days, millions of Americans could be strapped for cash. Nearly 50 million seniors could stop receiving Social Security checks for a time. Troops could go unpaid. Millions of families who rely on the monthly child tax credit could see delays. I should have probably mentioned that earlier with the Chuck Schumer clip, but I did mention it now. How about that? Nearly 28,000 pounds of frozen pizza has been recalled due to misbranding and allergens. The frozen pizza giant DiGiorno crispy pan crust pepperoni pizza is part of the recall. ABC News reached out for DiGiorno for comment, but they were out delivering pizzas. DiGiorno better than delivery? I don't know. Well, like I said, this microphone's not perfect. I hear it keeps fading out there at the end of my sentences. So I'm gonna talk louder at the end. You're not gonna beat me, microphone. Okay, moving on. A federal judge approved the plan Monday to unconditionally release John Hinckley Jr. Remember him? He shot and wounded former President Ronald Reagan in 1981, as well as several others. And apparently, if he continues to follow the rules and agrees to undergo regular mental health examinations, he gets to get out. And no restrictions. Still no word from Jodie Foster, but I think her name was trending as a result of this yesterday. Well, redemption. How about that? In South Korea, the president there has suggested that they should ban eating dog meat. How about that? That's a good idea, I think. Yes, South Korean President Moon Jae-in is pondering a prohibition on citizens eating dog meat, according to USA Today. The issue was raised during a meeting between the prime minister and the president. So quote is, hasn't the time come to prudently consider prohibiting dog meat consumption? I think the time has come. According to CBS News, an estimated 1 million dogs are eaten annually as part of the country's daily cuisine. Gross. All right, a lot of people have been wondering where R&B gospel singer Kelly Price has been. Well, apparently she almost died of COVID-19 amid recent reports that she was missing. In an interview with TMZ published Sunday, she said she isolated herself after recovering from the virus. She avoided family members during that time and apparently even flatlined at one point. So, Grammy-nominated artist was the subject of a missing persons report, but no, she just had COVID. Jeez. In New York City, police are impounding vans that are being used as Airbnb rentals. I mean, I know it's expensive, but people are sleeping in vans. I'd do that. I mean, I've done that. What am I saying? I don't know what the big deal is. Come on. Sometimes you got to sleep in a car. Speaking of cars, Ford has announced it's going to bolster electric vehicle production in a multi-billion-dollar push. That made me happy to see. I want to read more about that one. A massive fireball soaring over North Carolina at 32,000 miles per hour was caught on video. That's pretty cool. NASA says the fireball fell over the North Carolina coast around 7:40 p.m. One of at least 5 fireballs seen over the U.S. the same night. They keep saying fireball, but it's a meteor. The American Meteor Society shared the video taken from the porch of a home in North Carolina, which showed a fireball, massive fireball. But it's a meteor. It's not a fireball. But they just keep using interchangeable terms. And now I don't even know what to think it is. This is a crazy story out of California. A woman there was charged with starting one of the wildfires that created massive amounts of damage. Her name, does her name even matter? 30-year-old woman faced a felony arson charge with enhancement of committing arson during a state of emergency. Apparently she was attempting to hike to Canada, and she tried to boil water, and she started a fire, and that fire began September 22nd, and as of Monday evening was 60% contained, but the fire burned more than 8,500 acres and prompted the governor to declare a state of emergency in Shasta County, and that fire destroyed homes and forced thousands of evacuations. Thousands of people were affected directly by this woman wanting to boil some water. So be careful in any area where it's really dry with anything as much as a cigarette. Let's just say a bonfire. Crazy story. But here's another crazy story. Facebook announced Monday that it's pausing its development of its controversial, quote, Instagram Kids platform meant for children under the age of 13. Good God. I can't believe that was even a thought out there. And I'm really happy to hear that they've been pushed to stop this. That is grotesque. It's bad enough. It's really, really bad. And I just found out about this organization run by teens. I've reached out to someone to talk to me about it. It's called Log Off. Definitely interested in that movement. Started by teens, run by teens. And finally, a good news story. Global Citizen, an organization I used to work with and would like to work with again at some point. They generated $1.1 billion at their 24-hour concert that featured performances by a whole bunch of celebrated artists. But they got $1.1 billion in commitments and pledges over the weekend to fight extreme poverty. To be fair, I mean, they worked to get these pledges for a long time, and then they announced them, and it culminates on this weekend in September every year. Awesome organization. I highly recommend that you support them. Great group, Global Citizen. All right, that is the news dump for Tuesday, the 28th of September. And now it's time to get to my guest. Coming up, historian and expert on authoritarianism. She's got a great Substack called Lucid, which I am a paid subscriber to, and an awesome book called Strong Men, From Mussolini to the President. Ruth Ben-Ghiat joins me in about 30 minutes from now. But first, I caught up with Jason Johnson, who I always love talking to, really good friend of mine. He is now the host of the Slate podcast, A Word, which is great, comes out, I think, once a week. You can see him on MSNBC all the time, where he's always excellent. And, of course, his day job is as a PhD professor at the School of Global Journalism and Communication at Morgan State University. And love this guy. Love following him on Twitter at Dr. Jason Johnson. And we talked about his most recent episode of his podcast. Maybe it's not the most recent, but talking about having black friends and all that goes along with that conversation. And we had a great talk about relationships with folks. I just love it. I always love talking to him. Our conversations are always great. So let me just play it right now. At Dr. Jason Johnson. Tell him you heard him. Here we go.
Let's start with a black friend. We all want a black friend in our lives, Pete.
Everybody wants. Well, I don't know that everybody wants. I don't think that's true, actually.
Mitch McConnell wants a black friend. That's what he's got David Cameron for. That's what he's got Tim Scott for. They've all got black friends.
Who's David Cameron?
David Cameron. Oh, wait, am I saying it wrong? No, yeah, it's David Cameron. Yes, he was the former prime minister for, I think, Labour in the UK. But also he's the name of the attorney general, the African-American.
Oh, yeah, Kentucky.
In Kentucky, who suppressed the Breonna Taylor investigation in order to cover up for a black woman being murdered for being in her own house. And then he married a white lady who I believe may be related to Mitch McConnell in some distant way.
I bet you everybody is. So a recent episode of your podcast, which is great. People should listen. A Word with Jason Johnson. Had a great conversation with another guy who's got a great new podcast. And the title of your episode is Canceling the Black Friend Excuse. And you had scholar Khalil Gibran Muhammad, who is the great-grandson or grandson of Elijah Muhammad. Is that right?
Yeah.
And you explored the black buddy myth of racial healing.
Yeah,
I want to have that some of that conversation with you.
Yeah. I mean, well, okay. So here's the thing. Khalil Muhammad is a great guy. And yeah, I think he's a grandson of Elijah Muhammad, who's, head of the Nation of Islam. Most of us are pretty much familiar with Louis Farrakhan. I mean, I think Elijah Muhammad had passed before you and I were born, or somewhere. So I think he passed sometimes in the late 60s or early 70s. But anyway, the idea is that all too often we don't have discussions about friendships and interracial friendships and how those are built, how those are maintained, how those survive, the kinds of topics and issues and growth that we're dealing with. And then also how they're poorly depicted in Hollywood. I mean, the presentation of friendships is just trash in most television and movies anyway. And I mean, and it's not just because of crappy writing, because to be perfectly honest with you, Pete, I suspect if you ask your average person, most people have a hell of a lot more experience with functional friendships than they do with functional romantic relationships. And they're still written like shit. So, so that's something about how Hollywood tends to operate when it comes to interracial friendship.
And you can talk about that. I'm sure you could talk about so many different episodes and TV shows because you also are a huge TV nerd. But
yes.
But you said something during the podcast. I had the same reaction. Something about like a commercial with a black guy and a white guy, a black woman and a white woman, like hanging out and laughing. And every time I see it, I don't know if it's the same reaction. You just hinted towards your reaction. I'm always like, nah.
Yeah, exactly.
And I feel bad. I feel bad because it's the right thing to try to do.
No, it's not.
It's not. Well, you can tell me why, but I'll see them and I'm like, those two people aren't hanging out. And if they are hanging out, they're not having that type of fun. That's not how it goes. It's not how I feel. So what is your beef?
So it's very disingenuous. And it first off, it comes from the fact that we have to fundamentally understand what friendships are made of. Right. And again, that I think that's a key thing. And that's one of the things Khalil and I Muhammad talked about. Friendships are not like romantic relationships. We all have an idea what romantic relationships are about. There's songs, there's music, there's plays, there's everything about it. Two people fall in love. They make unrealistic and unhealthy sacrifices for each other that are completely illogical to overcome the surmounting difficulties of life, right? And they stay together and they screw, and that's love, right? In theory. Friendship is sometimes quite stronger than love, believe it or not, than romantic love, but it's also built on different things. Friendship is built on mutual interest and investment in individuals who actually don't have a necessary requirement in your day-to-day function, right? Like your romantic partner, once you're invested in them. You kind of have to have them around. If they go, you're heartbroken, right? A friendship is often built on, hey, we both like this thing. We both happen to be in proximity together. We both grew up in this particular neighborhood. I don't have to have you in my life, right? I'm choosing every day to do the things necessary to keep this relationship going. And therefore, it brings out different things in us. And so when it comes to race and the way in which race is something that white people as a collective tend to ignore and pretend isn't going on, black people don't have a choice because white people foist it upon us all the time. That manifests itself in how you would actually be friends with someone.
Yes. And there's a difference between a romantic relationship. Just to be clear, what you were saying is if my wife is black and I'm white, folks, in case you don't know, if it's a black person and a white person in a romantic relationship, that's different than a platonic relationship, same gender or opposite gender. Why?
Well, because
you just touched on it, but
because it's the amount of effort and investment that you have to put into and the consequences, right? Because here's the thing. In your romantic relationship, you and this person become bonded together, and it is kind of you against the world, right? It's like, this is my wife, this is my boyfriend. Whatever it is we are, it is us against everybody else. With a friendship, you are kind of navigating the world with that person. And the circumstances under which the friendship occurs changes how you interact with that world. If this is your friend from work, right, then if she is white and I am African American, the way the workplace treats us both is going to have an impact on our friendship. If my best friend is a black guy and I'm a white dude and we're in high school together, because this is what happened to me, and you are competing for grades and scholarships and who gets on this team and that fundamentally changes because of the racial dynamics of this country. That changes how you're going to interact with each other. They ain't going to necessarily happen as much with a romantic partner.
Your podcast and this conversation has forced me to examine deeper my relationships with black people. And it's interesting how I think it's just changed. I think that when I was growing up, it was humor and that's it. And a certain camaraderie, like just friendship that extended, but it was humor that started it. And then now the black folks that are in my life, if they're pretty good friends, it's usually based through our work and the subject matter we discuss. So there's like a lot of like intellectual type conversation, although you and I, for example, have had tons of like conversations about relationships and people and gossip and media.
It's anything, yeah.
Yeah. But it's all based in a certain kind of intimacy and trust that started, with a professional relationship. But just to get back to my point, I feel like humor is the thing that ties anything can. I suppose anything can, but I feel like it's most typical. At least that was my thing. I didn't like the music, black music, or most of the cultural stuff. I didn't like it. I was into basketball, but not like that. Like,
right.
I couldn't have these ridiculous arguments. They annoyed the shit out of me. I would usually we'd be hanging out and I would leave. And I'd come back. I'm like, are we still doing this? Can we make fun of each other or whatever? You do something. And I don't know. It was all humor. And I just don't see really so many cultural differences. It's hard to build those relationships because of trust and lack of cultural similarities, I feel.
Well, and that goes to what you were saying, Pete, at the beginning. That's why the commercials seem so lame.
Yes.
Because it's like, look, I'm telling you, if I think of single African-American women that I know 30 and up, very few of them I can think of have close white female friends, who they didn't necessarily meet in college, right? Like I don't know that many. And mind you, here's the other thing about romantic interracial relationships, right? Versus interpersonal ones. So romantic, you define it by, okay, I say I love this person, they love me, people are having sex or whatever. But friendships can vary, right? Because I know for a fact, I see it on Facebook. I've had these conversations. I got plenty of people who I went to high school with who were like, you know what? My good friend, Jason Johnson, we weren't friends, damn it. We sat next to each other in chemistry class. I was not your friend, right? But you got other people who will say like, well, they ain't really your friend if you haven't been to their house. I've never been to Pete's house. Pete's never been to my house, but I consider Pete a friend, right? Like you have different definitions of what constitutes a friendship and how you maintain it. Also, as you get later on in life, like if you're a parent, you have two wonderful daughters you posted pictures of, you have your parent friends, right? Like the parents of the kids that your daughters hang out with. That may be different from your professional friends or just your married friends, right? And all of those relationships are going to manifest differently. And again, there's a racial component to that. Like I said, when you're single, a lot of what you do single, you're socializing in places where you can meet members of the opposite sex. Well, if I'm a black guy, if all my guy friends are white dudes, we're going to go to places where there's mostly white women, which means my chances may or may not, depending on what kind of white women we're dealing with.
The Norwegians here.
My chances of success may vary. So people tend to socialize with who they have things in common with and where they can enjoy the most stuff together.
The one thing, and the last point on this observation, Beth, the commercial thing, I distinctly recall it was a Buffalo Wild Wings commercial. And it's true that if anything brings black and white men, especially together, even like a rednecky, and a blackety black, whatever we want to call them, together, sports.
Yes.
Like it's and these guys high-fived on the commercial, but in this case, the black guy had a baseball cap with a bent brim, and I was like, "What? Who are these two?" Okay, they're watching sports together, but they're trying too hard to make these two guys friends. And I just remember just laughing and recoiling at the same time at that commercial.
There's a woman who wrote a great book called "Some of My Best Friends Are." And this is from 10 years ago. And I met her in Cleveland. And then she's a researcher now at University of Massachusetts Medical School. And she talks a lot about this. We had these great focus groups where she would just bring in people and she would just talk about okay, do you, what's your definition of friendship? Do you have any friends that are not the same race as you? Do you have any friends? And the problem is for a lot of white people who consider themselves to be decent, moral human beings, they feel bad if that's not the case. So I don't really have them. That's why they keep trying to say that they're best friends with the barista, Keisha. You're not friends with Keisha, right? She works at the freaking Starbucks.
You're friendly.
You're friendly, Now, for me, I will also say that the people who I'm friends with have changed. When I was just having a conversation last week with an old friend of mine who is from Dayton, Ohio. She's Iranian American. And her husband's a white guy. I think actually his mother's from England, right? Now, I didn't really think about it that way, but I'm like, oh yeah, she's an old friend. I don't have that many friends who are Muslim. I don't have that many friends, but she is a practicing Muslim. We don't talk all the time, but I still consider her a friend. You have all sorts of different kinds of diversity in your life when it comes to friendship relationships. You don't always think about it because you've connected over other things.
Why don't you get closer with Waj?
I don't know him. I know Waj, but he and I have never had, I don't think I've ever met him in person. I don't think he and I have ever had just a personal conversation or sat in a green or something else like that. And here's the other thing about it, Pete. And like I said, it's different because people who are their parents, they have different responsibilities. It's the time that they can spend together. It's the stuff that they like to do.
Yeah, sure.
All those things come into play.
Yeah. But what do you think of making a conscious effort of trying to make friends with people, have relationships with people who are of a different ethnic background or religious background? Making I don't have any Asian friends that I'm close with. I should find some. I should make some. I should go to the Asian whatever community center. What about that effort, making a conscious effort to do that?
I think it's weird and creepy and tokenism and offensive. And I would never wake up one day and say, I don't have enough white friends. I need some more, right?
That's not a great example.
Yeah, this is just really weird.
They're everywhere.
Right. Listen, I'm surrounded by white people. But here's the other crazy part. It's this is where we go into the romantic versus the personal thing, right? Because if somebody were to say, if person X is you know what, I haven't dated any Asian Americans, I haven't dated any Muslims, I haven't dated any black people, I guess I should go out and do that, we would all immediately recoil and say, you're a fetishizing jerk. So I kind of feel the same way when it comes to friendships. The thing is, it's not a matter of going out and making friends. It's being open to the people who you would be friends with regardless. right? That's the thing. Like you don't want to be resistant to different kinds of people. I don't have a lot of friends in their 20s anymore because I'm not 28. Right? So that doesn't mean I don't like young people. It just means that the people who are under 30 who are in my life are usually former students of mine or people who I've met in the most random of ways because I'll hang out with 20-somethings anymore.
Well, I'm just canceling a couple things off my calendar. I was going to go to a powwow also the Asian American Pacific Islander Cultural Community
Center. The AAPI conference. No, that's not how you're going to make a friend.
They have a bazaar. I was going to I guess, but what about this? What about you get in a cab or you're at an event and you meet someone who's of a different whatever, and you spend a good time invested in learning about them?
I think that's different. And if it happens, and again, our perceptions of what is organic and natural and what constitutes friendship, because again, when Khalil Muhammad and I were talking about this, so his best friend, who he does a podcast with, is this white Jewish guy. They grew up together in Chicago. The white guy happens to have, his wife is African American, but it certainly seems to me that this white guy spent most of his life hanging out with black people just through proximity. Yeah. So it wasn't like an effort thing. It was like, if anything, it would be weird for me to not hang out with black people because these are who my freaking neighbors are. And this is why my school is 60-something%, African American. So that's kind of my thing. If you meet people in a normal, organic way, but also, and I think this is important, there's limitations to that. Because you can have work friends. That doesn't necessarily mean they're come over to your house friends. You can have personal friends. It doesn't necessarily mean you share everything about work with them, and that comes into, I'll give you a perfect example. And again, this was like the youth thing. So when I was a kid, when I was in high school, I remember that I had this neighbor. His name was David Arnold, right? I don't give a crap. I don't know if David's listening. I don't know where David is. I think he lives in Atlanta. Anyway, so his neighbor named David Arnold. I'm in F it all.
What happened with you and David?
So I used to hang with David, and it was his mother, father. They lived on the corner, sort of our cul-de-sac. Now, David and I were cool. I never thought he was a particularly ambitious guy. He was kind of, stumbling through life or whatever. And I was a really driven kid. Again, some of that comes from your African-American kid in the suburbs. It's like white people are treating you like shit all the time. So you're like, hey, I'm going to get the hell out of here. And my parents were you've met my mom. We're driven, like living up to my mom's standards, right? My dad. So anyway, I will never forget that, like, when we started getting back college acceptances, I got into University of Virginia and David didn't, right? And so David starts asking me all these questions about what my grades are and everything else like that. And then I find out later, I remember talking to my mother about this, and then his mother actually came down to our house and like asked my mom like what activities I was doing, because she was like, I don't understand, David and Jason hang out, and he didn't, David didn't get in, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, I mean, like, David wasn't my boy, he wasn't like my best friend, but it was still like, we hang out together enough, we're neighbors enough that what my work ethic is. So you questioning that I got into UVA and you didn't is just some racist white guy stuff. And, and it affected how I looked at him. It affected how I looked at his family. And again, that relationship, that interracial friendship was perfectly fine so long as at some subconscious level, the white guy felt like he always had something over on me. But the moment he found out that he didn't get into the same school that I did, and it was something that he wanted, suddenly, I was less fun to socialize with. And those are the kinds of interactions and interracial friendships that we don't talk about enough. And that can happen when you're 18, and that can happen when you're 38.
Yeah, we definitely don't talk about that enough. That's why I love talking about it right now. He, by the way, I just looked it up. David Arnold now hosting Fox and Friends.
I know. This does not shock me. It doesn't shock me one bit.
Surprised you didn't know that.
You know what? He's going to run into this podcast. He's going to be really surly about it. I'm like, hey, dude, what's up?
I hope so.
I was Virginia Tech. I went to UVA. How was your 4 years at Tech?
I want to ask you about, we can always talk about everything. I'm almost conscious not to talk about racial things, although I just always want to talk about them with you too. But you can talk about every single thing.
Yeah, that's on the podcast. I mean, like I said, I think that, like I said, the concept of race and friendship is just so I'll say this before you get to the other question. This is the other key thing. I think also there's a gendered element to this, right? Like we don't have TV shows and movies about guys being friends, just guys. You know, like there's tons of movies, the Joy Luck Club and whatever, about women and women get movies about friendships all the time. I think the first movie I remember about actual friendships in my life, the first was The Fox and the Hound, which is my favorite Disney movie of all time.
Oh, wow. I watched that with my mommy.
Oh, yeah.
Little boy. I remember I went with my mommy to the movie.
Love that movie.
Yeah, I did too.
But here's the interesting thing. Well, it's The Fox and the Hound. It's basically a proxy race story about two kids who grow up together as friends until society is like, by the way, you're supposed to be mortal enemies.
Oh.
It resonated with me.
Me too, I think, maybe. And I didn't know it until just now.
And then I don't think there was another movie about guy friendships until like Swingers. I think I was like the next one. And then
Stand By Me?
That didn't feel like a friend movie to me. It didn't. It really didn't.
Well, why do you bring this point up about we don't have the cultural references, at least in entertainment, to see these types of relationships play out as role model, like to see what it could be like?
I don't think we have enough programming. I don't think there's enough written about intimate, platonic friendships with men as they age and what those things actually mean and what kind of conversations guys actually have. I mean, yes, you can have your look, I love The League, right? I love The League when that ran for 4 or 5 seasons on FX, and it was about these guys who get together for fantasy football. But it was actually part of the show was the idea that these men didn't really have super close relationships. They came back together every season to play fantasy football and joke and everything else like that. Whereas we see movies about women and we see TV shows about women maintaining their personal friendships for years. And some of that ends up being helpful. It makes a difference. There's a reason you have incels and angry, isolated men and shit like that, because men aren't taught to stay friends with guys.
No, I'm all about this subject matter, and I'm trying to find ways to work on it outside of scripted, shows that we're talking about, but just meeting up online. And, it's, I've built this community here of listeners where I've become such good friends with so many of the men, and I want them to become friends with each other and share shit, all the stuff that we're going through, because there's a ton of research on this and it's killing men. And so it's really important to me. Before I let you go, speaking of TV shows and race, I guess, I just saw this, The Wonder Years, which was my favorite show. I love that show. And I mean, I will fight you if you want to be critical of that.
Straight to violence from Pete.
But what is the new? There's a Wonder Years Redux, and it's a black family. And on the billboard alone, to me, I was like, yeah, I'm watching that because I think it takes place during that time.
Yeah, it's the same time.
And I like the format where there's going to be probably a narrator. Like, I don't know. I love that stuff, and I wonder if you already have thoughts about it, if you've been paying attention to that, if that's a show you can talk about yet.
So yeah, so you didn't see, so it premiered last Tuesday, Wednesday. Yeah.
I see.
Whatever. In this DVR age, we can catch stuff whenever.
Literally, like, this is how closet I am in my silo of information. Like, I saw that because I drove into New York City and saw a billboard. Like, a billboard got me. Go ahead.
I knew it was coming out for a while because I remember when they announced it, because Fred Savage is like one of the executive producers. The voice. Yeah. So, I mean, which is good. Like, he's from the show. The voiceover narrator who's telling the story of his youth is Don Cheadle, right? And love pretty much almost anything Don Cheadle does. Right. Excuse me. As for the show itself, I thought this is the thing. Like, any classic TV show, Seinfeld, Cheers, we're talking 80s, 90s, even more recent things like Veep, right? Or Insecure. I'm not the person that I can watch one episode and say, I'm going to stick with this or not. I'm just not. I usually have to watch 2 or 3, right? And then I always make a distinction. These are important caveats. I always make a distinction of like, am I the target market for this show? Right? So for example, I'm not the target market for Gossip Girl. I don't like watching shows about rich white children and the racially ambiguous black people that they actually cast in these shows. in order to sort of satisfy some sort of virtue signaling BS as opposed to a real authentic story about race, wealth, and sexuality. Like, I don't like shows like that. So I'm not going to watch Gossip Girl. Maybe it's great TV if I was 17, but I'm not 17.
Right.
But that being said, I look at the Wonder Years and I think, like, substantively, the first episode was fine. I thought it was entertaining, right? But, you know, Tiffany said this when we did IG last Saturday. It's like, it's Tiffany Cross, you know, host of Cross Connection for the audience out there. But we were talking about this last Saturday, and it's like, I liked it better. I liked the Wonder Years better when it was called Everybody Hates Chris. Because to me,
all right, okay.
I'm just saying, because the original Wonder Years, right? I was a kid, so I identified with Fred Savage. Yeah. And it was really just a story of being a teenager. It didn't matter that it was the 60s. I didn't really care about that. But I don't have any nostalgia about 1968 through the early 70s. I wasn't even alive. So the Wonder Years now, the reboot hits me in a weird sort of way because I'm like, I'm not nostalgic about this time period. And then the other thing is I have a fundamental sort of negative reaction to rebooting old IPs, white IPs with black casts, rather than just giving opportunities to new black creators. Because it ain't like there aren't 50,000 stories out there that can be told. We don't have to reboot a 30-year-old show.
That's a really good point, and I never thought about that, and now I have. But I do have one final question.
Now you're wrecking for me, Jason.
What?
And now you've wrecked this for me.
No, I mean, no, you make fine. I'll still maybe watch it. I think that what you're talking about with Everybody Hates Chris is that he did come up in the 80s.
Yeah.
And you could relate to that, which is why you preferred it as a similar type of show. So I get that. That does make a lot of sense. I don't think that time genre was that important for me either, outside of the element of the Vietnam War. But they didn't really explore that enough. But the last question I just want to ask, do I need to know about Kyrie Irving? I know enough about sports.
Oh, God,
like the big players. I saw you tweeting about him. So he's one of the star players. He plays for the who does he play for?
Brooklyn Nets. No. He's Brooklyn Nets, yeah.
Oh,
with
yeah.
James Harden and Kevin Durant, yes.
Oh, all right. So that's this all-star team. Well, forget about the fact that those three guys are on the same team. We can put that aside. He's not getting vaccinated. He's not been vaccinated. And in New York City, you have to be vaccinated. So he potentially can't play home games. And there's a lot of, I actually am very interested in this. Do you mind just giving me a minute or two on what's going on here?
Yeah.
Thoughts on it?
This is the thing. This whole element, this new thing we're seeing about professional athletes not wanting to get vaccinated, right? We're hearing about Kyrie Irving now, but remember, heading into the NFL season, it was Cam Newton, who was at one point looking to be the quarterback of the Patriots. It was the Minnesota Vikings, their quarterback, Kirk Cousins, who beat the Seahawks yesterday because even though that's my team, Pete Carroll's screwing up. You got a couple of prominent quarterbacks and a couple of players in the NFL who are like, I don't want to get vaccinated. Now you've got with NBA players. Here's the fundamental problem. Number one, even though we know that most of these teams are run by mini Trumps, right? Most of these billionaires who own NFL franchises, NBA franchises, they're not particularly progressive people. But as much as they may be pandering to Fox News and the Republican Party, they know for an absolute freaking fact that this is a pandemic and that this disease, that this virus can affect people's ability to do their job, which is why they've implemented all these policies, right? Which is why they've got people testing all the time, which is why they say you need to get yourself vaccinated. And it's even more important when you get to a sport like basketball, because football is 30 seconds of action. The whole point of the game is actually to stay away from people, right? You've got a helmet. Literally, if you put a little mask thing on your helmet or a visor, you're not getting that much on people. But basketball, it is skin to skin, body to body, elbowing, defense, whatever. If somebody has coronavirus, they literally could infect everybody on the court over the course of a 2.5-hour game, just breathing each other's air. So Kyrie Irving, who has been a bit of a gadfly and a malcontent throughout most of his career in the NBA. He started on the Cleveland Cavaliers. He never managed to get them to the playoffs. LeBron came back to Cleveland. He goes to the finals 4 times with LeBron. Then he says, I want to be the man. So he leaves Cleveland, goes to Boston, keeps getting hurt all the time, can't compete with Boston at all. They get rid of him. Then he goes to New Jersey Nets. Now he's been with the Nets. He's hurt all the time, and he complains, and he doesn't want to come to work. And he says that that the earth is flat. And he talks about how he doesn't need to wear a mask and all this other kind of stuff. Oh, and he went to his mother was born, I think, on the Black Rock Sioux Reservation. So he made this big thing last year of going to the Sioux Reservation and getting his tribal identification and everything else like that. But at the same time, like, he apparently walked around the whole reservation and schools not wearing a mask. And we know he's not vaccinated. So now he's going to, I mean, like, they may not be able to, the NBA Players Union can't make people get vaccinated, but it is so difficult for your team to deal with you if you don't get vaccinated that you're either going to get traded or they're going to start docking you checks.
Nobody feels bad when you're injured. They don't blame you for being injured. You're playing hard, you get injured, but they do blame you if you stayed out late gambling or drinking, or if you brought it on, if you brought the illness on yourself so that you can't help the team win the game. When you're professionals, you have to win and you make more money and blah, blah, blah. This guy's making a choice. And these owners, however Trumpian anti-science they are, their main investment is to keep their players healthy, period.
Yes. So, yeah. So I'm going to say this quick. Like, I'm not a big fan of Kyrie. And it's because, you know, I used to live in Cleveland. I saw his antics there. And I want this to be key because there's always such nasty racial classist overtones when people talk about sports. Like, I am pro-labor. My issue with Kyrie has always been, and this is how I judge any player. You're an employee. You're there to make your money, make as much as you can, get out of this league. These leagues are exploitative. Yeah. But he didn't even seem like a good teammate. Like, his other teammates seem to think he's an ass. Like, when your teammates don't like you, that's when I'm like, okay, you're probably a jerk. But look, if he decides that he does not want to play because he doesn't want to get vaccinated, okay, more power to you. Take your check. If that's what you want to do. You know, I think it's dumb, but if that's what he wants to do, more power to him. But I do not believe, I find it very difficult. And I have to say this because this was Cam, this is Kirk Cousins, all these other people. If you're a professional athlete, basketball, baseball, tennis, soccer, anything, football, you have access to the best damn health care of anybody in this country. Your whole job is your body. You have nutritionists and virologists and team doctors. And who doesn't take a phone call from an NBA player? So don't give me this bullshit. And I will say bullshit that you've done your own research. No, you didn't. You could ask anybody. It's like Nicki Minaj. Nicki Minaj could call Dr. Fauci tomorrow. If they got to call at the CDC and like, Nicki Minaj wants to talk to you, they're going to let you. So don't tell me that you did your own research. Just say you don't want to do it. Take your L, take your money and go. But don't pretend that you don't know if this is safe, because you take tons of shots in your body every day so that you can get up and get your knees working and go run up and down that court for 2.5 hours, making millions of dollars. You can't tell me you know everything that comes into your body.
Yeah, 2021. Well, I was trying to end the interview there, but somehow my computer just completely shut down. It's pretty wild. But the link stayed up. So I was frozen to Jason, but he was still there. And he kept doing the thing that you always do. And I'm just going to share that with you right now with little edits, because there were pauses in between, but it's funny to listen to. So my computer shut down. I was gone. It was the end of the interview. Anyway, I was literally wrapping it up right there. So no worries about that, really. But I was lucky that that's when it happened. I think my computer might have overheated. Anyway, here's Jason just being thoughtful and patient, waiting for me and wondering what happened. It's hilarious.
You just went out, Pete. Hello? Hello? Pete Dominic.
Yeah.
Hello there.
Yep.
Hello?
Yeah, I was gone. I was just gone, but he kept trying, and I loved him. I love him for it.
Right. Leave this on in case Pete comes back.
And then he walked away for like 5 minutes, and then you hear him come back one more time, and then he finally gives up on me.
Hello.
I love him so much. I mean, I had texted him during that time. I just don't think he checked his phone for some reason, but I just thought that was really funny. Love Jason Johnson. At Dr. Jason Johnson. Listen to his podcast on Slate. Watch him on MSNBC. And if you can, become friends with him because he's the greatest. All right. And also very excited to have another PhD on today's show. She is an expert in authoritarianism. She's a historian. She's an author. She is Ruth Ben-Ghiat. She is a professor at NYU. She writes frequently for CNN and many other media outlets. And her latest book is Strong Men, From Mussolini to the President. I highly recommend that you subscribe to her publication about the threats to democracy and abuses of power. She's on Twitter as well, at Ruth Ben-Ghiat. Ladies and gentlemen, here we go with another update from the great at Ruth Ben-Ghiat. Okay, here we go. I've got her, Ruth Ben-Ghiat, joining me now, Dr. Ruth Ben-Ghiat. And unfortunately, you keep being right, and the things that you say are going to happen, a lot of them kind of happen, and you have become a very valuable resource for a lot of folks. And of course, have your own outlet, Lucid, which is awesome, which I'm a subscriber to. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, damn you, doctor. Damn you for being so educated and saying a lot of this stuff's happening. Where are we at? How are we doing? Generally speaking, what inning are we in?
Ooh, what inning are we in?
Or choose a metaphor, or, it just seems like it's getting late. It seems like it's getting kind of late.
It's not too late because the midterms are in a year, right? Yep. And then we have 2024 is far away. So it's not too late if we manage to have a big mobilization of people, which means we have to sensitize people. So thank you for all you're doing too, to give them a sense of the urgency of helping to register people to vote, getting people who never vote to vote, and pressuring lawmakers and doing all this kind of building democracy protection into your everyday life. Because that's what we've got to do if we want to keep the freedoms that we have.
My feeling is that the most important thing folks can do right now is get hyper local. And yes, that can mean any number of things. But can you tell me a little bit? And if you want, obviously history or what you're seeing happening right now, I feel like the right is super organized and they're killing reason at Board of Education meetings, town councils, etc. So what about that? Hyper local.
Yeah, it's hard because because a lot of the time we talk about the national level, but in fact, the right wing playbook, which is way before Trump, it was the Tea Party and Steve Bannon taking back America, each school board at a time, each town council, and now it's coming into being. But it's even more dangerous than during the Tea Party because now you have people who are just really far right extremists and also QAnon and Proud Boys, and all of these people are running for office at the local level. And so the only way to make sure they don't prevail in deciding, what you can do in your town and what your kids are going to be able to read or not read in school is to get involved yourself at that level. So the hyperlocal is extremely important. And the history of fascism shows that that's true because fascism in Italy started at the local level. It started in the countryside where fascist squadras, before Mussolini came to power, they conquered town after town. And then when they had already a kind of critical mass, they did the March on Rome, which is like the January 6th, except it ended with Mussolini being invited to be prime minister.
When we're talking about local, it would seem that there's a lot folks can do. But one thing people don't talk about, supporting certain people for office, running for office in their local communities as well. But one thing that is also missing is local media. So we have a very influential guy in my town who posts on Facebook, and he says that our school did a thing or didn't do a thing that are untrue or completely blown out of proportion. Yeah. And it goes viral and it's not fact checked because you don't have much local media. I do think there's a way to monetize local media. I think people that have any experience or I'm considering doing it where I live, to do it, but we need local journalism to tell us what is actually happening and what isn't happening. Like CRT, like how has that gotten anywhere? It's not happening, right, but people think it is. So what about local journalism, local media?
Yeah, and that's really important for the health of democracy, because democracy is about protecting civil society. And civil society is lived at the town and everyday life level. And the whole, like people your neighbor who maybe you don't agree with them, but you were still civil until they got radicalized. And so it's in the interest of authoritarians, and Trump has tried so hard to do this, and all the little Trumps now, to make us so polarized that goes away. And local journalism is very much tied to keeping alive that sense of a town identity, of a local identity that's beyond politics, where you have well-being of everyone in mind. And there used to be these benchmarks like, yes, we're going to get vaccinated, or if you have a cold, you don't sneeze all over somebody, you cover your mouth. And of course, disinformation has made that disappear. But local journalism is absolutely crucial. And of course, it's death for profit reasons. If we look back at, why democracy has been weakened, and not just in America, the taking away, the privileging of other kinds of media for profit incentives is one reason why.
A lot of people are talking about this new book by Bob Woodward and Bob Costa, Peril. Yeah. And I'm wondering how much you've heard about it, read about it, and what, you learned that you think is important to take away from at this point right now, including about January 6th and, John Eastman's memo and more, although I'm not sure if that might have been a CNN scoop. Anyway, what else do we know about January 6th that we need to talk about, and what in this book have we learned that you think is super relevant?
Yeah, the book just it gives more information on how close we came to some kind of self-coup succeeding, and how very important in history the actions of a few people, in this case Milley. That's why they're going to try and get rid of him. He's under a pressure campaign, and I predicted that, because that's how these things go. But we learned also, as though, some of us didn't need more proof, how very unhinged Trump was in that time. And my book talks all about that. How, when they think that they're going down, they're going to lose immunity from prosecution, they're going to leave power, they become psychologically unhinged because they are already sociopaths and narcissists, and it's like dying to leave power for them. And so they become so reckless that, in fact, this wasn't in Peril. We learned this before, but Christopher Wray had a memo, and he said, my top priorities were no coup, no foreign war, and no civil war. And in fact, political scientists have a term for when dictators when they get reckless. It's called gambling for resurrection. And so they try and start wars, or they go further into wars. They do all kinds of stuff. So we lived through this, and this book, Peril, just gives us more details. We lived through a version of this, even though we were still a democracy, and in fact, had voted him out.
I also am really terrified about what we're seeing regarding the idea of replacement theory, which has the long-held belief, it's not new, but now it's being touted by mainstream right-wing media, Tucker Carlson and Congressman Matt Gaetz as well, who called the Anti-Defamation League like racist against white people. You've got a great piece at Lucid about the history of Jews being painted as tricksters and spreaders of disease, this anti-Semitism's new wave. Can you believe we're here? You probably, of all people, can. But that replacement theory is even, become an actual thing that Fox News, a major corporation, is touting, as well as elected congressmen, not just crazy folks on the right, the Klan, Alex Jones. This is mainstream arguably part of the GOP platform soon.
Oh, it is. I think it is part of the platform. I mean, they don't have a platform. Their platform in 2020 was just, we support Trump, like all hail leader.
Yeah.
And in fact, but the replacement theory is all over the place. And this is an example of how you have things that were on the fringes, that were believed only by white supremacists who didn't have any political power in society. And then somebody like Trump comes along and the extremes are now in office. You have lawmakers talking about these things. You have, as you said, mainstream media, because Fox is mainstream media, right? They play that they're against the mainstream media. But this is very effective. And in fact, these images that are evoked by replacement theory about they're going to replace us and thus we're going to be annihilated. We're going to be submerged. This is a global right-wing talking point. And in fact, I have quotes from Mussolini in the 1920s, before Hitler came to power, saying that white people were going to be outperformed demographically by people of color. And so white civilization would be extinct soon. And this was in the 1920s. So they play on the fear of annihilation, of being like flooded. And so then it goes with all of the propaganda about caravans and hordes of people. So the way propaganda works is to paint really terrifying pictures. So it plays on your emotions, not your reason. And so being drowned by people who are not white, and by either they're coming over the border or they're having too many babies is a classic.
What about, I mean, how new is it to say they're replacing you as voters? Democrats want these foreigners to come in to vote for, whether Tucker Carlson has talked about the Afghan refugees and the Haitians, and obviously he's always talked about this from anybody south of the border. I mean, it's, first of all, just to be clear, it's a stupid idea. It's like a few thousand of them. They're not going to affect the outcome of any vote. They're spread all over the country. But more importantly, like they'll vote. If you have good ideas, they'll vote for your ideas too. They're not coming in as Democrats or Republicans. If you've got good ideas for folks, go ahead and try to turn them into Republicans. I mean, it's not real, but it does seem, I don't know if it's a variation. They're just trying to replace you as voters, or they're trying to bring in more voters.
No, I'm so glad you brought that up. This is a very interesting variation. And it's the variation you have to have if you're still in a democracy. Because believe me, places like Hungary or, of course, fascist Italy, they didn't have to talk about them being voters because there weren't any voters. And Hungary, you have elections, but they're fixed. So it's here where Trump was voted out. And Democrats, the younger Americans are skewed heavily Democratic. Like, it's a threat. They could lose again. And so they have to hit this note about them becoming voters. And then it goes with voter fraud too, because of course the immigrants coming in, the migrants, they're all criminals. This is part of the propaganda. So what's interesting in the history of propaganda is you have these these chestnuts, these like classics, and then they get adapted to every circumstance that you need.
I wanted to ask you lastly about an interview that you did, a guest that you had at Lucid, named he's a psychiatrist, right? Dr. Alexander Stein. You talked with him about human behavior. I mean, you've been writing about this a lot, and I think it's a fascinating and important part of this is, who are these folks? How are they vulnerable to believing things that aren't real and to not believing things that are real? What is the psychological but category of people who will do whatever it takes to win? They don't care about the rules. Like, I'm just making up kind of qualities that I see in some of these folks. The toxic masculinity. What did you learn from him, and what does history tell us about folks who fall into these categories and support these authoritarian leaders?
Well, it's that they create an environment, and Alexander Stein he works on fraud and misbehavior in business. Cool. So our conversation was super interesting because we looked at the overlap of business and politics. But the key, what they have in common is that the leader creates an environment where corruption is rewarded. And so Dr. Stein, his definition of ethics was using restraint in your behavior. But somebody like Trump creates an environment where, he came on the scene and said, hey, I might shoot someone. I'm not giving my taxes. Yeah. So what if I, grabbed private parts? So it's the specter of being able to do whatever you want and not paying a price. And so that leads people to be their worst selves. And then they populate government with people who are unscrupulous. So we talked about that. That can happen in business. So that, a corporate culture or a government culture or a university culture can reward certain kinds of behavior. And then people, they throw away their moral principles because they get rewarded even financially. Right? That's how corruption works. It's like a contagion, but you have to set the example from the top, and then you have to reinforce it. Go ahead.
Well, what I see sometimes, especially in companies or in other organizations, is it's less insidious in that it's, well, I know that's wrong. And if I said something, maybe I'd stop it, but I probably wouldn't. And, I'm just not going to say anything. I'm just going to be, I guess, complicit.
Yeah, the conformism and people, and then, you also use an intimidation. You make it threatening for people to speak out. At the very least, you let them know that they'll lose their job. Right? There's lots of good dramas on TV, like Billions. All kinds of things that show this to be true. Right? But what Dr. Stein said, which is interesting, he said when somebody's really on a trajectory toward wrongdoing, you can't really stop it. And then you'd have to, if it's the leader, you have to just get rid of that person, which a board of directors can do. Think about like Adam Newman with WeWork, right? And the board of directors had to step in. But then he said, like a lot of times companies and also countries that have dictators, they don't really want to engage with that process of self-reflection. Like, how did we get into this mess? And so we in America, because there's no closure from Trump because of the way that January 6th happened, and now he might come back. We haven't been able to reflect on that fully.
We haven't investigated it fully. There haven't been consequences. All right.
No.
So lastly, how important, this is the big question that always gets debated, but I care about your opinion much more than most, which is how important is he? This is a cult. You could even call it a death cult with COVID now, to some extent. Yeah. It's certainly a cult, though, Trump. And how important is he to the cult and to the movement? It was always boiling and happening before that. There are all kinds of charismatic leaders on the radio and everywhere else, and TV and YouTube and podcasts now. How important is Donald Trump?
He's still highly important. And there are signs that, which are very interesting if you study authoritarian cults like I do, where at one point he started talking about the need to get vaccinated and he got booed.
Yeah.
Right? Which
I've been there. I know. As a comic, I so relate to him. I always do. He's like, he throws out a bit. It's not working. Pull back. Try something else.
Yeah. But it means that they've gone beyond and they need him. But that's a symptom of being in a cult mentality, because the leader, you have imbibed certain truths and they really are truths for you because you believe in this figure and you need him to be who he is with those truths. And it's a very rigid mentality. It gives an explanation for everything in the world, just like conspiracy theories, because Donald Trump is also a conspiracy theorist, right? And QAnon overlaps with anti-Semitism and with all kinds of stuff. And in fact, the movie they showed before the January 6th rally was a QAnon film. It had elements of that in it. So he's key, though. He is the biggest driver of coronavirus disinformation, of election disinformation, and that's why he got removed from Twitter. But the cult is still very alive and well. And I predicted that it wouldn't go away, and people didn't like that idea back in, when he first lost, because they really needed to have closure. And I was like, it's not so easy. They don't really disappear unless they go into exile or they die.
Well, I don't like a lot of your predictions, but I do like you.
Get back to my predictions.
I do like you, and I do appreciate the fact that you're writing and talking and everywhere you can to make sure that people know. So, at the end of the day, you've done your job, you've done your work, and many of your colleagues as well, of telling us what's happened in history and why it can and is happening here. And there's almost no one better than you. So I really appreciate you joining me again to educate us. And I look forward to talking to you again. Thank you very much, Dr.
Thanks so much.
Stand up. All right, there you go. Dr. Jason Johnson, Dr. Ruth Ben Ghiat, and you. Thank you to Pete Coe for the jingles, the intro. Thank you to John Carroll for the music. Thank you to all of the subscribers who make this podcast go each and every day. If you haven't signed up, go to standupwithpete.com right now or patreon.com/Pete Dominic and sign up and join us in this amazing community that we are needing. Certainly I am, more and more as the world gets crazier and more dramatic seemingly. Let's keep talking it out, supporting each other, giving each other solutions. You guys have been super supportive to me lately, and I love you for it. Now it's time for me to go. I'll talk to you tomorrow. John Carroll, take us out right now.
Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. Let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of the stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the